Welcome and thank you for joining us today on International Day of People with Disability. Today's session will be captioned and Auslan interpreted. To activate the closed captions, click the CC button in the toolbar that is located either on the top or the bottom of your screen. We also have captions available via browser, and we will add that to the chat box now. Thank you to our captioner Melissa from Bradley Reporting and our Auslan interpreters Kim and Joyce. My name's Alicia Ford. I'm a National Disability Coordination Officer and I will be your chair today. You're invited to use the chat box feature throughout the session to introduce yourself and to share any comments or reflections. Please use the Q&A box to ask questions. And if you have any trouble accessing the chat box or the Q&A box, you can email your questions to davids@stepsgroup.com.au. That's davids@stepsgroup.com.au if you have any trouble with the chat box or the Q&A box. We also encourage you to tweet about the event today using the hashtag UDL Tertiary Ed AUS. The 2021 International Day of People with Disability theme, Leadership and Participation of Persons with Disabilities towards an Inclusive, Accessible and Sustainable Post-COVID-19 World, is very apt for what we're doing today. Participation in tertiary education contributes to the development of our leaders for today and into the future. COVID-19 has highlighted many issues of access and inclusion experienced by people with disability, as these have been felt by more and more members of our community. But it has also sparked interest in addressing these issues. UDL offers us a framework to work towards a more inclusive, accessible and sustainable tertiary education environment. Before we commence, I'd like to invite my colleague, Sharon Bailey, to acknowledge country. Thanks, Sharon.
Good afternoon. I'm honoured to be on the ancestral lands of the Ngarrindjeri people and acknowledge them as the custodians of these lands and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge the first Australians as the traditional custodians of the continent, whose cultures are among the oldest living cultures in human history. I acknowledge that we are also meeting on the traditional country of the Yagara, Darawal, Camarayagal, Kurungay tribe, Walkurukaba, Bindal, Lururita, specifically the Nipaluna on the lands of the Muwi Nina people. And I'd also pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging as the custodians of these lands. I would also like to extend an acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the Kiwimalt and the Lekwungen peoples and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I recognise and respect that the cultural heritage, beliefs and relationships with the land, which continue to be important to all First Nations people living today. I pay respects to the elders of each community and extend my recognition to their descendants who are also present. I'd like to hand back to Alicia.
Thank you, Sharon. I now invite Darlene McLennan, National Disability Coordination Officer and Manager of the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, to give an overview of today's session and to introduce our keynote speaker. Thanks, Darlene.
Afternoon or morning, everybody, and kia ora to our New Zealand counterparts who have joined us and for all those who have joined us around the world by the look at in the chat. As Alicia said, my name's Darlene McLennan. Really excited today to be welcoming a fantastic guest speaker, but also to be launching our new e-learning training, which is fantastic. This resource has, we're about to launch, has been live for the last day, but has been brought about by hundreds of people being involved to actually bring it into fruition. And I'm very excited to be launching it today. It has been made possible by the Department of Education, Skills and Employment, who are the main funders for that resource, and as I said, an amazing team. The resource has also enabled us to connect with colleagues from the UK, USA, Ireland and Canada to have some conversations, and we hope this is just one of the first steps that we take towards enabling universal design for learning across the tertiary sector. We have a guest speaker today, Frederic Fovet, who is going to, the topic is From Curiosity to Systematic Implementation, Making UDL Buyin a Strategic Institutional Reality. We will have some discussion after the presentation and launch about how you can stay connected and how we can actually bring UDL into reality across our sector. It's not just going to be about undertaking the training, but it's going to be connecting. It's going to be about developing some community of practices. It's going to be about sharing our practice with others through online forums. So we've got lots of ideas on how we can not just make this training a static one-off event for people, but how they can ensure that it starts to be embedded in their everyday practice and teaching. We do have a Q&A session throughout the webinar. We encourage you to ask your questions there. As we said, as Alicia said at the beginning, please feel free to chat with each other in the chat box, but we will be managing the questions from the Q&A box. And continue after Frederic has wowed us. Please stay on to be a part of our official launch. It won't go for long, but we're actually very excited to actually have a video from Graham Innes, who is very busy today celebrating International Day of People with Disability, but he has some wise words for us as well. Okay, now I'd like to introduce Frederic. Frederic Fovet is an Associate Professor in the School of Education and Technology at Royal Roads University. He has previously held a position of Assistant Professor within the Faculty of Education of the University of Prince Edward Island. He is an inclusion specialist with a specific interest in social, emotional and behavioural difficulties, critical pedagogy and universal design for learning. Frederic also has a strong grounding in disability studies. He acts as a consultant both nationally and internationally in the area of UDL and inclusion. And he has been an instigator and program chair of the first 3 Pan-Canadian conferences on UDL in 2020, 2015, 2017 and 2019. So I think he's well placed to be talking to us today. I had the pleasure of listening to Frederic at an Ireland conference, I think last year, the joys of us now being able to join everywhere around the world online. And I was inspired and blown away with that conversation. So I'm so looking forward to having him today. And a number of our advisory committees actually put Frederic's name forward when we're looking for a presenter, because he's so well known and his work is leading in this area. So with no further things to say, Frederic, I'll hand over to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Darlene, and thank you for the organizing team. It's a wonderful job. You're a great supporting team. Bear with me while I just get us started on the slides. Let me just go to full presenter mode. So I got to wait a couple of minutes. So welcome everyone, an incredible turnout, 346. I'm honored to have so many people joining this session. And today we're going to be talking about UDL, but really talking about UDL from an implementation point of view. So I just got to bear with me while the top banner disappears, so I can actually click on the, it does normally disappear. Just give me a minute. Okay, well, we'll start like this. I'll go on a land acknowledgement while the banner disappears. So I'd like to do a land acknowledgement as well and acknowledge that Royal Roads University sits on the unceded territory of the Gosumsun and the congruent families and communities. And would also encourage everyone joining us remotely to acknowledge the people and lands and nations that have used since ancestral times the lands on which you are playing, working, or sometimes even holidaying at the moment. And also the last point I would like to make is in Canada, particularly, we're very conscious that the Truth and Reconciliation calls for actions have not yet been met, and that we have a lot of work lying ahead of us. Whoops, sorry. Now we're not really, oh, it's behind there. Okay, that's good. Oh, no, sorry. Try again. Okay, so things did not go well there. Okay, give me a minute. We'll get back to it very quickly. course,
But
this happened.
all the testing we did beforehand, that was
happened
probably we
after-
tried too easily, too much to get it all right.
And there we are.
Yes, agree, Tracy. Murphy's Law as always. Just while we're waiting, just encourage people who are on Twitter that the handle is #UDL tertiary ED Oz, and it seems to, yeah, people are tweeting, so it's fabulous. Thanks.
So in terms of, I'm going to continue on, sorry, on share, not on the full, presenter screen yet, because I still have that banner at the top that does not want to go away and I can't reach the design thing. But just to, okay, hang on, if I go there, no, that doesn't work either. This is not good. Are you still on the, okay, can you see me? Can you see the
Yeah, we
slide?
can see you. We're seeing the slides, but we're seeing
Let's
the
just continue
ones
and then we'll
down the
catch up.
sign. Yep.
So the objectives that we're going to look at today is explore how the work related to UDL in tertiary education needs to go beyond pedagogical considerations. So really, I'm going to talk about the Canadian context, North American context, and talk about how for 10 years, we've been talking about UDL in terms of benefits for the classroom, benefits for inclusion. But there's now a huge gap there as to how do we go on to the next step? How do we do the rest of the work? And that's really what I'm going to focus on, as we've collectively thought this would be a great topic for this presentation. In order to do this, I'm going to really work the presentation in 3 stages. First, I'm going to talk about the need. Why do we need UDL? And I'm going to argue that really we need to go back to this if you want to convince people and to get buy-in from people. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how do we get buy-in from individuals, how do we get to the how of UDL, and how do we start talking to people about implementation. So this is more the personal level, individual level. And then on the third stage of the presentation, I'll talk about institutional and organizational challenges. So if we look at organizational hurdles, what are they, and how do we get through them, and how do we address them? The format of the workshop, so it's always a bit ambiguous when we do a presentation on UDL and we do it online in a very short time. You'd like to be as UDL as possible, but it is difficult to be, to deploy all of the strategies that we have when we have such a short session. But I have already, I think the organization has sent you an interactive doc where there's been some great discussions. That's going to stay open, and even after the talk, I encourage you to go on there and continue to exchange, because beyond being a discussion with myself, I've looked at it just before the presentation, it is a discussion amongst yourself. So I think it'll be great that you carry on looking at it, and you can download it and keep it, and I think it's going to be the basis for a great dialogue across Australia with the work that you're doing at the moment. We're also going to use Mentee a couple of times. I'm just going to poll you twice just to keep this interactive. You have my my handle for Twitter there, Fovet. I'm on the hashtag that we're using for the conference, and will continue to be on for the rest of the evening as well. So if you have questions that we can't tackle today, please feel free to get to them then. We'll have approximately 5 to 10 minutes at the end for some questions. Feel free as well to email me. There'll be my contact details on the slide, and to continue questions past this hour. An hour is very short for what we have to cover, but really it's to sow the seeds and to carry on this discussion beyond the hour. And then the slides, I will add the Mentee slides to the slide deck, and I will share them through SlideShare. And they will be on Twitter, on my LinkedIn profile. So if you want to go and grab them there as well, you'll be able to grab them there and continue that discussion as well. But I would like to stress that it is something that we need to continue thinking about, because often we are doing the preaching, but we're not actually being UDL while we're doing the preaching. So in all of our interactions, even professionally, we need to also infuse them with UDL, because otherwise it doesn't make much sense. The dialogue that we have and discourse that we have is discordant with what we're trying to do. So it's a reflection I encourage you all to have. In terms, I'm going to go through some of the slides very quickly. I think there's about 30 slides or 25 slides. I'm not going to use them all, but I wanted you to have that material there to be able to go back to it. In terms of personal lens and methodological stance, this is going to be very phenomenological, in the sense I'm going to draw a lot from my personal experience. So I feel I have a unique experience because I've been manager of an accessibility service in tertiary, and I'm a faculty member. So I've navigated both environments, and this is not an easy, I can talk about it later maybe in the questions. It's not easy because both perspectives sometimes clash. So it's hard to be across the barrier at times. I've been involved in large implementation of UDL as an accessibility manager in the Canadian campus from 2011 to 2016. So I understand the complexity of it. Now as a faculty, I've been academic head and program head at both universities I worked in, which meant that I have been supporting contract faculty in trying to be inclusive and trying to implement UDL. So I've also got that perspective of sort of how do you model it? How do you introduce it in terms of professional development? And then, as Darlene said, I've acted as UDL consultant to colleges and universities in Canada, where I've come in externally to try and assess process. My research and my scholarships also focus on UDL. So I'll be drawing from all of these perspectives. And you will feel them, and I'll try and feed the talk with anecdotes as well. Now, I'm particularly excited to be making this presentation today because obviously it coincides with the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. I'm really lucky. I'll get to celebrate twice, once today with you in Australia, once tomorrow in Canada. I'm also an alumni from an Australian university, so this is close to my heart. I did my PhD at La Trobe. So I do have a strong connection to Australia as well. And it really warms my heart because while I was doing my PhD, so 2011, 2016, I was working at McGill in accessibility, but I was also doing my PhD at La Trobe, and I was flying back and forth about 3 or 4 times a year as an off-campus student. And I would come in and always try to knock on doors in Australia and say, you know, this UDL thing is happening in North America. Are you interested? And at the time, there was no interest. I could talk to you about lots of conversations I've had with people, and when I tried to say, you know, I'm available, I could do presentation, it was absolutely none. So we are now quite a few years behind, and interest is really building, and we have, you know, 366 people tonight, so I'm really, really excited about that as well. So we'll go on to the first interactive activity on Mentee. So I'll talk to you while we do it. I did not generate the codes before because from my experience, if we do that ahead of time, then the codes reset. So if you could go to mentee.com, www.mentee.com, I'm going to give you an activity code. We'll do that first because that's the important part, and then I'll read you the question. So the code is 92 37 49 0. If we could have someone put it in the chat as well, that'd be great. So 9237 490, and I'll repeat again after. But so the question I have for you to try and engage the room a little bit is, what is the degree of comfort and experience you have in your own context, campus, office, department, whichever, has achieved with regards to UDL? So it's a pie chart, and you have 5 options. Campus-wide implementation has been achieved, some in-depth implementation, but in sporadic pockets within the campus. The middle answer is campus-wide curiosity, but no hands-on implementation. The 4th one is budding curiosity around pedagogical benefits of UDL adoption. And the last one is interest is only just beginning. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and then we'll try and go to the slide, and I'll let you know what the results have, what the spread is. And I will include that slide in the deck, so you will be able to visually see it when you go to the slide share on my Twitter or my LinkedIn later on tonight. I'm not going to switch screens just from experience, having done a lot of those in Zoom, because things then go very wrong. So we're going to keep them there, and I will talk to you about what I see on the screen. So I'm just going to go into presenter mode and see what we have. So at the moment, we have 66%, 67%, so a majority, budding curiosity around pedagogical benefits of UDL inclusion. Then we have 53% interest just only beginning. And then we have 34, some depth implementation, sporadic pockets. We have 24% says campus-wide curiosity, but no hands-on implementation. And then we have just a 1% that says campus-wide campus implementation. So nothing really surprising, but I did want to go through that exercise for you to realize that the spread amongst yourself, and that is sort of typical of this stage, I think, of UDL implementation. So hence the importance of really, doing what we're doing today, which is to think, how do we go beyond that? How do we get to a point where we're stopping? Well, we're not stopping, but we're talking about the benefits, but we are going beyond the benefits, and we're talking about how to do this and the strategic implementation. So just in terms of context, I've mentioned some of this already, but I'm going to be talking to you about the North American context. There has been a lot of momentum in North America. So really, I joined McGill in 2011. And my mandate then was, you have to make this happen. This has to be rolled out across campus. So we're 10 years behind now. So in this decade, there's been interest both in the K-12 and the tertiary sector. We have seen this in colleges, what we call community college. So some of you, which would have given some further education, vocational training in different environments, and informal, higher ed, formal universities. It's encouraging, obviously, but I keep really hitting a point of frustration, because at the same time, I think there's really there's a real paucity of literature around the organizational dimension. So how do we scale this up? And really, we fail to explain and to acknowledge the fact that the tertiary sector is complex. I will come back to this today. I will say that the tertiary sector is multi-layered, complex, politicized, and also diverse, because we all come from different environments. We have different theoretical training, and we have often some very different professional training, which makes it very hard. It's very hard to promote an idea and a model when you are dealing with a population that is that diverse. Now, there's actually it's not just sad that we're not seeing strategic pieces, but it's also worrying, because what I'm seeing is, after 10 years, a lot of the people that have done the work, so individual instructors, individual departments, accessibility services, communities of practice, they've run out of steam. And that's what happens. If we don't actually tackle the strategic piece, we will get nowhere. There's that curiosity, that first sort of momentum of energy, and then people get exhausted because they haven't thought ahead. How do we grow this? How do we scale it up? So the burnout is very real, and it's something that I will come back to today, and that we need to be careful of. So the first thing I'm going to do.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Frederic. We just had somebody just said in the back end, if you tried full screen, I will
try again. Hang on.
Yeah, just because I think people are struggling to see it.
And it's Jane here, and I think if you hit F5, it could also do it.
We've had lots of IT people in the background.
There we go. That was F5 was the thing.
There we
go.
And also
get back to.
I think it's fine. To that one. And just encourage just to slow down a little bit, just to, if that's possible.
But
Thank you.
keep asking me, because I speak too fast. It's my French background. So section one of the presentation is going to focus on identifying the need. And I do want to stress this and spend a good 10-15 minutes on this. I find that we don't take the time to contextualize the need for UDL. We'll often have seen the pedagogical benefits, we're interested, we've tried it, we can see that students will like it, and it's going to be really beneficial for inclusion. But we don't take the time in organizational and strategic context to explain to people why there is a pressing need. Now, the tertiary sector is bombarded by initiatives and reform and innovation and policy and new policies. It really is a landscape where nothing is going to really make it through unless you manage to position the initiative that you're presenting in a way that makes it unique and that really triggers sustainable interest in people. Otherwise, I'm going to be quite frank in this. I'm going to be quite candid in this talk today. But as a faculty myself, what people do is they put their head down and they wait for it to go away. And that's what we're fighting in this environment. So to avoid this, we really need to take the time to contextualize. Why do people need to take notice of this? Why is it that this change must happen? Why can we not carry on with the way we're doing things at the moment? And that's what I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at. So when I started at McGill in 2011, I came in sort of, fresh-eyed and really focused on really one argument, and it's the fourth one on this slide. So I've given you the 5 arguments that eventually we did develop and that I would use as my, what I call elevator speech. So if I walked into a senior administration, if I walked into student body, walked into faculty, worked to accessibility folks, this is what I would go back to. We might go, my to-go slide. And really the way I developed this was really through a triangulation of doing endless sessions, some 5 minutes, some 12 minutes, some an hour, some 3 hours, some a whole day in different contexts within the same campus. And eventually grew this in response to what people said was missing. So originally with my team, we would go in and talk mostly about the social model. And it is a huge piece. And in the next 2 slides, there's some information for some of you if you need to fill the gap around the social model. But I think it's really important, and I do take UDL always back to the social model. I call it I call UDL a translation of the social model into teaching practices, right? Because what's unique about the social model is that it really forces you to step away from exceptionality, right? There's something individually different about that learner, to shifting back to yourself as a designer of the experience, and saying, no, the work doesn't need to be done by the students or by the students, the work needs to be done by myself as a designer of the learning experience. So that shift, it is only with the social model that it happens. And this is why it's so important to keep UDL really, really connected to the social model and really see it as a translation of it. Now, and you will see in the next 2 slides, we'll go very quickly afterwards on some of the resources that you can use and some of the ones that I've used. Obviously, that's a selling point. And if you're sitting with people who are aware of disability studies or people who work in the field, they will be receptive to that. But on the Google Doc that I've circulated, a lot of you have said, how do we talk to other people about it? And that's the thing. I think we need to diversify our elevator speech. And this is what we've built progressively. And this is what I'm going to run through quickly with you today. But it's 5 arguments that I keep going back. And what do these 5 arguments show? They show that accessibility or disability services, whichever way you want to call it, in the tertiary sector, no longer works. It's cracking at the seam, it's broken, and we need to move to something else. And that's why UDL is important, because once you get people to acknowledge that the system is broken, then they will listen to you and they will be receptive to you presenting something new. So very, very quickly, because we're only going to be able to go on the surface of this, but resource management. When I arrived at McGill in 2011, so it's a campus of 40,000 students, we had 600 students registered. When I left in 2016, we had over 2,800, close to 3,000. This is the explosion, so sort of a 4-fold explosion within 4 years. This is a common trend that we've seen across North America. Some disability service provisions in colleges in North America have observed 150% explosion, sometimes from year to year, in the service, in the demands of service for services. Now, it is costly, and we've got to think about this. The office which I run at McGill cost $1.2 million a year in accommodations. This is not sustainable expenses. You're not changing pedagogy. You're not changing systems and structures. You are literally throwing that money out the window, because the same students move on to another course and require accommodations again, and a new intake of students come in with requests for accommodations. So you are literally putting out fires with 1.2 million. It's not feeding transformation. It's not triggering any sort of pedagogical change. It is absurd. It's beyond belief absurd that we continue to look at this in terms of it's okay to spend this sort of money, but not to have an impact on the pedagogical mindset of our institutions. So for that reason, it needs to change. The increase in the complexity of diagnosis is, if you look at what we did in the 1960s, we could do tailored individualized interventions because we had mostly 3 traditional sets of disabilities: mobility impairments, visual impairments, hearing impairments. We now have a spectrum, and every time I take one of our provincial sort of categorization, we can have as many as 28, 30 categorizations of impairments that are encountered in a university or in a tertiary environment. If you wanted to continue to do that sort of individualized, personalized approach, you would need in your accessibility office anything from a medical practitioner, medical doctor, clinician, all the way to psychiatrist, right? And everything in the middle. We don't have those resources. In fact, the message very much in tertiary is you have to do more with less. So in fact, we're not going to have this personnel. We're going to have less personnel than we had before. Sustainability, I've been very lucky at McGill. When I started this work at McGill, Darlene's going to tell me not to, the interpreters had finished. So I thought Darlene was going to tell me to slow down. I'm going to try and slow down a little bit. When I started the work at McGill in 2011, we had something called McGill Vision 2020, which was a sustainability drive. And the guy who was running that was very interested in looking at inclusion as a sustainability goal. And I kept talking about the sustainability of our inclusive practices. So we were able to exchange dialogue and to embed the work of each other within that discourse, and to share each other's discourse. It's really important, because I am going to come back when I look at UDL and talk about UDL and talk about sustainability at 3 different levels: individual instructor levels, units and departments, including the sustainability of accessibility services, and institutional, in the sense of resource management, the amount of money we're spending, how to do things more wisely. So sustainability is very important. And it's one of the things we should go back to, because at the moment, what we are offering is not sustainable. A shift to the social model, we've discussed that, so I'm going to go over that quickly. And then inclusion as an imperative in the student expectations. We have loud and eloquent voices now in Canada who are willing to go to Human Rights Office and say, I don't want to have to ask for segregated services. I want to be able to function in a campus environment in an inclusive way. And they're coming out of a secondary environment where inclusion has been developed, and they are able to formulate this and to frame this and say, I don't want to go into a parallel system. I want to be in my classroom with my classmates, in my, with doing everything with everyone, but I want access to fully inclusive provisions. So these are the five sort of pillars, I would say, that show you that there's a need for change, a radical need for change, because the system is literally cracking. It's falling apart in front of us. Here are some resources on the social model that I've used with faculty that you can watch in your own time, and a little bit of an explanation here about why it's so essential to always bring the UDL model back to the social model. So a recap on this accessibility, right? The 5 pillars shows us that really nothing is working anymore. If nothing is working anymore, people are going to be open to looking for new alternatives. When I used to run our annual retreat in accessibility, I would say to my staff, can you imagine yourself doing the job that you're doing now in 5 years' time? And all the heads go down and people say no. So what do we need to do for you to be able to be happy about doing your job in 5 years' time? I've done the same question with faculty, and the heads drop even further down, and they need help because they cannot conceive at this stage how they can do the work that they're doing in 5 years' time. Now, so far I've talked about faculty. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the need from an institutional and from an instructor perspective. Wider beyond accessibility and impairment, if we look at inclusion, we also have problems with inclusion because there's a lot of talking of inclusion in tertiary. But really, it's very hazy. It's not practical. No one's giving anyone tools. No one really understands how to do that. We talk a lot about EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm sure it's the same in Australia, but it's a buzzword now. So we have hundreds of committees that do that. But none of those, if you look at carefully, are able to take you back to a pedagogical classroom context and say, how do you do EDI in the classroom? How do you actually do this? Now, a question that I had on the Google Doc was, what's the difference between differentiation and UDL? And this is important here because the only model really so far which has been offered to faculty is differentiation. But differentiation is really a little absurd again when you look at faculty in tertiary environments, because if you go back to Carol Tomlinson's model, which was really developed for the K-12, for the secondary sector and primary and secondary, what she says, and she does it very eloquently, she's an expert pedagogue, but she walks into a classroom and says, right, this is about keeping all students there, full inclusion, not just physical inclusion, but all students actually achieving the same goal, the same classroom goals, and being assessed in the same way. But you having to juggle the ball during the class and being able to actually differentiate, create these different pathways on just in time, basically, as you're teaching. Beautiful, beautiful concepts. But try and talk to a higher ed instructor about differentiation. First of all, let's say, I don't know my students. Sometimes in North America, sometimes we see them for 9 weeks. We see them on 9 occasions. I don't have time to identify their needs. Then they'll say, well, sometimes they're adults. They don't want to disclose their needs. So even if I was really receptive, they don't necessarily want me to know their needs. And also they'll say, I'm a content expert. I cannot walk in and I don't have the competencies to juggle the ball and create multiple pathways just in time in that classroom. So this has created a lot of frustration in terms of inclusion, because for the last 20 years, really, we've talked about differentiation as a format for higher ed, for instructors to be able to do this, but they don't know how to do this. And they find really that format completely impossible to achieve. UDL is going to be much more hands-on, but it's also going to give you that sort of step back, because UDL is never about doing this just in time. It's about maximizing the downtime you have, or the moment before you redesign a course, or the moment before you choose a resource, or the moment once a year when you have time to redesign an assessment, to say, right, so now I'm at home, I'm calm, I can hypothesize about barriers, And I can remove these barriers systematically by inclusive design, by thinking about the possible barriers and removing these barriers in design. And that's a lot more restful for a higher ed instructor who, again, is a content expert, doesn't have much time, over-solicited, to be able to sit at home and say, okay, I can do this. This is not something so superhuman that they're asking me. I can actually do this. And I'm going to come back to this all the time and say that really UDL is a lifelong journey. If you want people to buy into it, you've got to really tell them this isn't going to happen overnight. I used to have people call me up and say, I have got an exam tomorrow. Can you make it UDL? No, mate, it's too late. You're not doing that tonight. If you call me next semester when you're thinking of redesigning, we'll work together and then we'll work on inclusive design. So it does have that sort of, it calms people down, right? In comparison to everything else that's been available so far. The great thing as well with UDL is really it achieves what the ideal inclusion model is to keep the students in the classroom. So when you look at social capital, people's autonomy, being able to be in the driver's seat, only UDL really succeeds in this, because the other models, accommodations, always mean that you're dependent on the service, dependent on others outside the classroom, etc. So it's really, really important. And lack of sustainability and etc. I'm going to pass on this slide because I think we've covered most of this to try and gain some time. Now we're going to talk about part 2. So how do we actually get buy-in from people? It's really hard to go past initial curiosity. So really the first job, which a lot of you are doing, is actually quite fun, quite pleasant. People read, people are intrigued, people want to do this, but to get people to really implement in their own practice is actually really, really difficult. So how can we do this, and how can we do this realistically, pragmatically, lucidly? This is what we're going to look at in this section. So I think the first thing to say is that UDL, first of all, I think I need to say that I'm not a purist in terms of UDL. I tend to really, again, look at it as we'll talk a lot about being a repackaging, that it's not necessarily things that are new, but it's a convenient repackaging. It's a repackaging that is easy for people to handle. It is suitable for a novice instructor and an advanced instructor. It is applicable across disciplines. It's fairly easy to get going and then to feel autonomous. It's something that you can do through life. So for all of these reasons, I think it's something that has a really great potential for the future. But I'm not a purist. We will get to the point where we discuss some of the problems with EL, and I think sometimes it becomes a bit of almost a sect. Have you drunk the Kool-Aid? Keep some distance. It's not something new. It's something that recaps a lot of things that we know about inclusion and does it in a user-friendly way. It's something that doesn't scare people off, and that's the essential part. So one of the way that you can stress when you're doing getting the buy-in from colleagues and from people around you is that UDL is a spectrum. Nothing is black and white. It's a mistake I used to do when I walked into faculty and started talking to them about this new thing. And then people automatically, it's human nature, will say, push away, not another new thing. When you make people realize that they are probably already doing UDL things, every instructor is already doing UDL things. So walking in and getting people to understand that this is just a repackaging, this is a model, which is a framework, which is convenient. Where are you on this framework? Where are you on the spectrum? Right, okay, you're already somewhere there. The only aim here is to get you a little bit further every semester, every year, as you move forward, to progress through your career and become a little more conscious of inclusive design and to have more tools in your box that you systematically integrate into your assessment, your rubrics, your way of delivering material. It's really important to encourage people to be slow. I've done a lot of presentation in higher ed when people come and see you at the end and they say, I'm going home tonight and that's it, I'm redesigning everything. No, this is actually dangerous. It's almost as dangerous as the person who says, I don't want to touch this. I find just as dangerous the person saying, I'm going home and doing it all tonight. They are not going to do it all tonight. They're going to burn out. Really important to say to people, this is, again, a progressive journey. It's a lens on your practice. It means that you're going to have a lot of time to examine what you do, try and do it better, try and do it more inclusively, think and hypothesize about barriers, remove these barriers, get the satisfaction of seeing the student's reaction, move forward and actually do it a little bit more. So really helping your colleagues situate themselves in the spectrum, it's huge. It seems like a small detail, but I can tell you when I do presentation, it's a radically different sort of reception. If I say oh, this is something new, or if I say, hey, this is what UDL is about. So where are you on this? Is there stuff that you already do? And they will tell you, yes, there's stuff I already do. UDL has often been presented as out of the box. I've said this already, but I think this is counterproductive. It's really important to not try and sell it as something new. It's not something new. It's actually something that really repackages a lot of principles of learning and teaching, several teaching philosophies. It brings them together, but it does put the focus on accessibility, and that's great. So, if you check out, my ResearchGate page and all that, you will see that I'm doing more and more work talking about, I'll talk about active learning and UDL. How do we create that overlap? Constructivism and UDL. How do we create that overlap? Social constructivism and UDL. How do we create that overlap? You're using the flipped classroom. How do we bring it into UDL? Because all of these things are useful, and all of these things can be used in UDL. The only difference is that if you had a graph, you'd have all of these large areas that would be teaching philosophies, what I would call progressive, fairly inclusive, transformative pedagogies. But in the middle, you have the overlap with accessibility, true genuine inclusion. And when you have that overlap, you have that happy place. And that's all we're looking for, really. We're looking for people to drag their own teaching philosophies, experiences, etc., but to create that overlap with accessibility. And that's what UDL does. It enables you to really focus on that happy place. What else did I have on this? So I'm just going to check that we've looked at all this. Yeah, it's a common discourse. I call it that too, because people sometimes say to me, but does it have to be called UDL? There's a bit of wariness sometimes, and we don't. But at the same time, it's a universal discourse. So being able to use it is great, because you're in Australia, I'm in Canada. Automatically, we understand the theoretical positioning that we're talking about. Don't have to be purist, we don't have to stick to it, but we understand what we're talking about. So it's a great convenient, on top of being this convenient repackaging that is user-friendly, it's also a great common discourse. One thing that I do want to mention is that sometimes you are going to get pushback from instructors who find it really difficult to implement UDL. And the reason why they can't implement UDL is because when you're talking to them about core objectives, right? Usually when you talk to people about UDL, you say, we're trying to create as much flexibility as possible, but not necessarily around the core objectives of your course. It's okay to have core objectives that are assessed in a very specific way, and to be transparent about that. And that needs to be, those competencies to be acquired and demonstrated. And in respect to that core center, you're not necessarily going to be able to give that much flexibility, but it's around all the rest. And there's a lot in a course that happens around the rest. That's where we're able to fully give flexibility. Now, you are going to encounter colleagues who are not quite sure what the core competencies are. And that's something that's happened to me a lot, is trying to talk to people about accessibility and inclusion in UDL, but they back away because they're like, well, I'm not quite sure. I couldn't formulate my core objectives, and I can't formulate my core piece of assessment. It's all a bit hazy. And when that happens, it's very hard. So often, we've got to acknowledge the fact that that discussion and buy-in from UDL is sometimes not possible because people have not had that discussion about the core objectives. Now, vice versa, sometimes people have very specific and clear understanding of the core objectives they're teaching and what's being assessed. And then that discussion happens very easily because they're quite at ease about being flexible about everything around them. Quickly there as well, in terms of pitfalls, UDL is not a checklist. You're going to have people who are going to say, I want a checklist. Every time I do a presentation, people leave and say, but give me a checklist. So it's a lens on practice. Actually, when you hit a checklist, you've gone wrong. It's a dead end. You haven't done this properly, because it should never be a checklist. It's really reductionist. It's about redesigning solutions that work in your content area, with your experience, in your individual classroom experience, and depending on whether you're undergraduate, graduate, vocational, tertiary, etc., and applying that lens constantly to your career. So if you get to a checklist, it kills it off. Nothing is ever inherently accessible or UDL. It is in context, and that's what's going to be very important. Now, caveat, it's not just about your colleagues that you need buy-in. You need buy-in from your students, and I just want to talk about this very quickly. We don't always talk about this enough. Students can be really thrown by the introduction of UDL. Because if all your life you've been told, advocate for yourself, ask for services, you need all these support services, and suddenly someone says, oh, they're not there anymore, but you're not actually told that they've actually been embedded in the course and in assessment for everyone, your initial perception is a loss. It's a loss of service, a loss of support. And that can be really problematic. And in fact, we find that for when you're trying a lot of different things, if you're trying innovative, transformative pedagogy, if you're trying to be constructivist, social constructivist, students always have that fear. They'll look at you going, where is he going with this? What's he trying to do? Now, if they understand what you're trying to do, then they progressively buy in. But you have to be patient because students too are tipping slowly and trying things and seeing the benefits and understanding, okay, this is good. I call this transitional friction. Whenever you transition students into a new transformative pedagogy, they don't actually like it. They will like it afterwards, but not in the initial instance when you introduce it. So be careful. I'll give you an anecdote there. I try to be really UDL. So in my reading list, I give people lots of different readings for each topic. Instead of having one, I really focus on different level of complexity, different level of length, hopefully have some videos instead of text, etc. But the initial, reaction of a student who's never done UDL is like, is he crazy? Does he want me to access all this? So there's that sort of walking people slowly saying, no, what you're given here is choice. You have to learn to be comfortable with choice. So there's a lot of handholding. And sometimes we don't talk about this enough on our campuses that actually, when I worked at McGill, we immediately started having, UDL 101 workshops for students. So they understand what you're doing. And that's very important as well. Yes, I'm mindful of time, but I do want to skim and talk about the most essential part. UDL is easy. Be careful with that as well when you're selling this to people, because it is not easy. It's a sustainable change. It's actually a lot of redesign and a lot of work, but that work eventually in your career and in your own practice will reduce the friction with students, will reduce the dissatisfaction that you have. So it's like, buying a new engine, it's expensive, but then it's sustainable because it's green. Well, it's the same thing. You do that redesign, actually quite extensive in terms of needs and demands, but then things get a lot better. And that's afterwards when people come back to you and say, I don't waste time. I get less friction with students. I don't get these endless emails. Everyone is happy from the start. And that's where you get the feel good. But I think it's wrong sometimes that we say this is easy. It's not necessarily easy. And I think people will really require to be realistic and pragmatic from the start. Quickly looking at this, is it more suitable for certain, tertiary discipline? The answer is no. And if we had more time, we'd probably do a dialogue around this, and people will sometimes have very set examples of, I think a gentleman in the Google Doc talked about chemistry, but there are studies out there from people who've done UDL in chemistry labs. I'm working with people who are doing UDL in art studio. It's not necessarily easy. There may not be literature. You may need to think about how to do it, but it doesn't mean that it's less suitable for that environment. UDL in language classroom, UDL in internship. I've done a lot of work on that and published a book recently where there were several chapters on that. UDL in the language classroom talk science lab, in physical education. All of these exist. It's just that sometimes they've not had time to be published and circulated, but I really think you're not going to find an area where it doesn't work. It works differently. And that's the important thing. We've got to realize that people may use the framework and get to a different tool, a different inclusive design, and that's fine. That's the beauty in tertiary, because in tertiary with academic freedom, we don't necessarily want a model that tells us do that. We want to have an autonomous a process with integrity around inclusion and accessibility that gets us to tools that work for us. And that's totally fine. And that's what happens. People may find different solutions working on the same problem. And that's the great thing about UDL. Okay, looking quickly at the strategic point, I'm going to take just 5 minutes and then we'll go to question. It is very important that we keep this in mind because, again, the tertiary sector is a complex, political, multi-layered, and also we come from different qualifications and training background. I think the biggest issue there is for us to realize that there's a problem about who has ownership of this. And really, in 5 minutes, the best way I can address them, and you can read the slide later. The problem that we always have is who has ownership, who's going to be in the driver's seat on the campus. It may be different people. It could be accessibility, it could be teaching and learning. It could be a specific office like an equity and diversity office. But that unit, by taking ownership, has pre-existing political relationship with other stakeholders on the campus, which can complicate implementation. So particularly, if it's driven by an accessibility office, you may have people who simply refuse it because they'll say, I'm a pedagogue, I'm a teacher, I don't want someone excessively telling me how to do this. Vice versa, if you have someone in teaching and learning in the driver's seat, you may have other stakeholders say, hang on, I look at this from an administration perspective. I don't necessarily want someone in another field telling me this. So all this to say that we need to start looking at things from an ecological perspective. And it's really that my big selling point. I'm going to take you there. This is a graph that I have from, from a paper I published, where I think that whoever is at the middle, we need to think ecologically about all the relationships that are there, the relationships that might become hindrance or may become facilitator. And that may lead a campus to decide as to who should be in the middle, because that will be different from campus to campus. So the same, a question I had on the Google Doc was bottom up or top down. Again, I would say go back to that notion of ecological mapping. The way UDL is handled by a small campus, which is a modern university and newly created university with easy pre-existing communication about inclusion, that will not be the same as in a traditional institution with a long history, very traditional, that has 50,000 students. It's not going to be the same process. In the same way as UDL is saying, one size does not fit all for the classroom, one size does not fit all for implementation. And the argument I push in sessions is to say, take the time before you take the jump strategically to plan this, to think, who are we? What's our culture? What's our organization? What are the variables that will influence in that stakeholder in the center? And do we have winning conditions? If you don't have winning conditions, well, change it. Give that portfolio to someone else. So have this as a combined portfolio. And that's what's going to give you solutions that are unique to your institutions. That's where we're seeing a lot of people fall down and stumble at the moment, because we're looking for universal solutions that work everywhere. They don't exist. We're looking for solutions that don't acknowledge history, size, culture, organizational structure. That's not going to work. UDL is always going to have to be a very nuanced, very subtle, very strategically designed approach for the implementation with each institution. And that's not happening. And this is unfortunately why we're seeing so many initiatives fall flat after 10 years, because people are exhausted. There's no momentum. There's no takeoff. It's not being scaled up. And that strategic reflection has never happened. So again, I would say take you back always to that mapping, and I call it an ecological mapping. And ecology was obviously very popular in education itself, putting the child in the middle, but it has moved. We put individuals at the middle, and those systems and interactions are also very useful as a model. And now in management, you put a unit in the middle, and those systems around the unit are very useful in understanding the pushback you're getting, or the resistance, or the buy-in. So that analysis is going to be really useful for you in Australia as you're beginning this, to not rush into it, but to take the time really to strategically do something that makes sense for your variables, makes sense for your environment, and that then has, winning conditions to grow from that. In about 2 minutes, I was going to do another interactive sort of thing. Yeah, don't reinvent the wheel as well, in the sense that regardless of what model you choose and what works for you, there's already probably another institution of similar size, similar history that has done something. So this cross-pollination is going to be really important too, because you often waste a lot of time trying to, once you've got that ecological mapping, trying to design something unique. But in fact, across the US, Canada, and some of Europe, Ireland, for example, a lot of models now have existed. Some are based from communities of practice, some are based top-down, some are based in a hybrid way. We could talk here and give you lots of examples, but they are very specific models now that exist and have shown that they work well in that sort of climate. Now, before we go to questions, I'm going to very quickly talk about the COVID crisis. I was going to do another interaction where I was going to say, do you feel that the COVID crisis has made things more complicated for UDL implementation or made them easier? So I'm gonna tell you what I would expect to see, and so for lack of time, we're not going to be able to do the second activity. I normally see a split room. So you are 348. I would expect to probably get about 150 in each side saying, I found it's made things a lot easier, or it's made things a lot more complicated. The end word there is that what it has made is it has disrupted the landscape. It has made that people have to make very instantaneous choices about accessibility and inclusive design at home on their own, often disconnected from accessibility folks, and they have to think hard. So this has been good because I think everyone has acknowledged the fact that they are all designer of an experience. But in terms of supports, they've not necessarily had the support or the networks or the connection, and that's been problematic. So it's a hybrid end result. Some things have been great, some things have been terrible. The important thing is that whatever's been great, we need to build on those lessons. And this is a unique moment where we can drag this into looking to the next decade and say, what did you learn about accessibility and inclusive design during COVID? Take it on board. Use UDL to develop it further in your lens and embed it into your future practice. So really words of hope that by being reflective, we can learn a lot from that. So I'm way out of time, and I know we were starting a tiny bit late and we want to finish on time, but if there's time for questions, I want to leave some time now for questions.
Many thanks, Frederic, for such a wonderful, insightful and jam-packed presentation. We do have some excellent questions coming through in the Q&A box, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague, David, to ask those questions of you now.
Thanks, Alicia, and thanks, Frederic, for your presentation. So we received some, I got some via email, some via the chat. The most frequent question is about your reference list. It's just quite a yes or no answer. Can you share that with the audience, please?
Yes, it's in the slide. So either if the slides that you received the slides, or at least I'll share them on the slide share. So if you go to my LinkedIn page tonight or my Twitter, they'll be there and you'll be able to access the references.
Thank you.
And you can also contact me for any more specific references. I would very general things, but I know there's some questions about specific areas of application. Feel free to email me as well.
Thanks, Frederic. So we have 3 minutes. So I think I'll try and pick one that is the most broad. Okay, so this person was wondering about how UDL works alongside person-centered approaches for support for people with disabilities.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I think it's one particularly within accessibility that sometimes can become a hindrance, because people look at the model that we have. So we sit in, an accommodations model, certain legal frameworks, certain funding frameworks. And if you're trying to move people along to a UDL model, people are starting to say, but I still have to work with this model. My funding is still based here, or my approach is still here. I think a UDL approach necessarily means that you've got to learn to sit between two chairs. That's the way I used to put it to my staff. You can't stay behind just because you still have to do that. You want to move ahead and be ready for the next phase. So for us, for example, in accessibility meant at one point from my 4 years in my management job, I split the office, and half of the office was doing still frontline service to students, but half of the office was doing frontline service for instructors. And that was a way to start that transition, to say we have to do what we do, but we have to move to the future and do what we have to do as well. But that ambivalence isn't easy, because people often want clear corners and well cut out format. I don't think we have that comfort. We're moving away from an antiquated model that's cracking up towards a new model that is more focused on instructors and the classroom designer than on retrofitting with the students. But for a long time, we will still have to do retrofitting. And to be honest, even in the future, even with the best of UDL frameworks, there will be still students with significant impairments that will still require specific accommodation from an office. So it's never something we'll be able to eliminate. We'll have to learn to blend them and work more towards a sustainable model that works for most people. And then when that's not there, there's still a backup that exists.
Thanks so much. And finally, which kind of matches what you were just talking about, and we only have a minute to go, but the heading of the slide, you had a slide that said that it didn't say that UDL is a new framework, but it did say we need a new framework. I remember it. So the individual and a couple of other commenters were saying, while the interest's picked up, isn't it old? And what did you mean by that slide? We need a new framework.
Yeah, but we have a need. That's what really the whole first section of the presentation. We have a need for change, because things as they are going now, the sort of medical approach, retrofitting, all of that, it's not working. As we've seen, it's not working for many organizational reasons. So we have a need, and we need something new. And yeah, you presented as it's new in respect to retrofitting and accommodations approach. But I think when you get into the nitty-gritty of what it represents in the classroom, people very quickly are comfortable, because they realize this isn't an entirely new framework. This is something, it's a new approach, but it's a new approach that actually encapsulates a lot of things I'm already doing. With respect to, again, constructive and social constructive and active learning, a lot of trends that are around that, you can bring into UDL, and it makes people feel comfortable that this isn't an entirely new framework. It's a convenient new solution to an old problem, let's say.
Thanks very much. So there's remaining questions, but what we'll do, if that's okay, Frederic, is send them to you, and you can respond, and we'll send it out to the audience after. Yeah. Okay, so thanks very much, Alicia.
Thanks, David, and many thanks again, Frederic, for such a wonderful presentation. Certainly has generated a lot of conversation in the chat and a lot of interest. I just want to remind people that we are also going to have an overview of the UDL in tertiary education e-learning and a short video from Graham Innes to launch that resource. So please stick around if you are able. I'm going to hand over to Jen Cousins now, content writer extraordinaire for the e-learning resource, to give us a brief overview of the training.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Alicia. And thanks again, Frederic. That was great. And I'd like just to kind of pick up on the point that, yeah, universal design for learning isn't a new concept, but I think what's new for us is the shared enthusiasm that's really building in Australia around that. So it's been a great opportunity to be involved in a project like this, where we actually can start to build some resources that help people reflect. And I think picking up on part of your presentation was around helping people see where they're situated in that implementation of universal design for learning. And so I'm hoping that our e-learning program kind of hits the mark for a lot of people in terms of being able to reflect and to learn a little bit more. And I know a lot of people in the commentary have been saying that they're really keen to learn more. This particular program we've developed is really an introduction, and we're really trying to provide lots of opportunities for you to do that reflection and to have access to resources, case studies, reflections from various educators who are already trying to implement UDL within their organisations in both the vet sector and the higher education sector. We've really designed it with educators in mind and instructional designers or content writers, but it will be equally valuable, I think, for some of those equity and disability practitioner groups within the sector as well. And I really like that idea that Frederic was raising around that, you know, we need to work together. We need to see how all of those things knit together if we're going to look at that across our organisations. The training takes around 90 minutes and it's free, and you will get a certificate for completing that. We do have 4 modules, and the modules are around firstly identifying the key principles and practices of UDL, looking at the framework that was developed by CAST in particular, and then looking at how would that translate for us in practice in the very practical ways that we work. And then the last module is really around you exploring how you could get started given your own context and the different places you could access resources. And for us, the real aim is around you building confidence around taking that first simple step or building on what you're already doing and making that recognition that, you know, you're probably, I would say most people are already doing something regarding UDL. So we're really hoping that it's going to be a simple course for you to do. There are lots of videos, audios, animations. We have a lot of downloadable components, and there are case studies for both the vet and the higher ed. So it's a bit of a choose your own adventure. You can go down just a vet kind of set of examples, or you could just look at the higher ed. And if you're really keen to explore, I think there's some huge benefits for us to actually explore what it looks like from both perspectives. Because I think for me, having worked in the sector for a long time, you know, it's been a coming together of a lot of people. And I think, you know, the privilege we have, given the amount of sharing people have done from their own experiences and contexts, will really be quite valuable. So I'm really keen for people to get on board. There are lots of downloadable resources that you can do to support your own reflection and to start that planning and implementation when you're ready. So I hope to see lots of people online as we go through.
Thanks so much for that overview, Jen. I'm sure you've generated plenty of interest, as we can see coming through in the chat. I'm now going to ask my delightful colleague, Jessica Buyin, to do some juggling. Jess is in the back end sharing those slides for us, and would like to just talk a little bit about our advisory group and the role that they've played in developing the resource.
Thank you, Alicia, and good afternoon, everyone. As Alicia mentioned, my name is Jessica Buyin, and I'm one of the NDCOs, one of the National Disability Coordination Officers who have been involved in this project. And I have the pleasure this afternoon of acknowledging our advisory group members and the many, many others who have supported the development of this e-learning training. But it really is more than just an acknowledgement of those who were with us on this journey, who provided their time, their knowledge, their energy, enthusiasm, expertise, passion, and so much more to actually bring this to life. Particularly for our advisory group, what was intended to initially be 4 meetings turned into 10 meetings. And then in addition to that, we had smaller subgroups. We certainly put the advisory members to work. They supported so many elements of the e-learning, from script writing to developing case studies, user testing, being recorded as well, and sharing their learnings, which you'll find in the e-learning resource. So I think thank you really it doesn't cover enough the gratitude that we have and the pleasure and privilege it was in working with our advisory group. But I do want to extend on behalf of the project group a very warm and sincere thank you to Dr. Alison Casey from the University of Notre Dame, Andrew Downey from the University of Technology, Sydney, Annie Carney from Box Hill Institute, Dagmar Kminiak from the University of Sydney, Dr. Elizabeth Knight from Victoria University, Dr. Erin Leaf from Monash University, Jane Goodfellow, North Metropolitan TAFE, Western Australia, Jessica Siege from Curtin University, Dr. Mary Draker, Deakin University, Meredith Jackson, TAFE Queensland Skills Tech, Mirella Suchiu, University of New England, and Dr. Stuart Dinmore, University of South Australia. In addition, and thank you to the hundreds of others as well who've been involved in this. So Charlie Robertson, Jane Hawkeswood, Callie Corvellis, who have all been involved and contributed time, energy, and expertise. Certainly without you all, we wouldn't be here today. We might be launching another 6 or 12 months, but very much it has been a collaborative effort across the sector. And I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge my fellow NDCO colleagues, Alicia Ford and David Swain, for all of their countless hours involved in this project. And finally, the project has been led in particular by 2 individuals, Darlene McLennan and Jen Cousins. So a very special round of applause to you both. And now on that note, I'm going to try and multitask because I also have the pleasure of introducing a short video from former Disability Discrimination Commissioner and Human Rights Practitioner, Graham Innes. As mentioned.
Yeah, so while you're getting up there, Jen, just to let people know, we've actually crashed the site, so, which is wonderful because everybody's been so excited to join up. So please bear with us. We'll sort through the technology. If you don't get access in the next 5 minutes, please come back and register. It will be up and going. But how wonderful that it got so busy. So sorry to stop you, Jess.
No, all good. Wonderful news. Very exciting. So on that note, I will share a video recording that Graham has provided to us. So Graham will be launching the Universal Design for Learning in Tertiary Education e-learning training. And bear with me while I do get that up on the screen, and definitely check back the website link a little bit later. Here we go.
A blue and white cricket ball shaped droid with silver arms appears on screen. It enters with the name Graham Innes AM.
I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which this video is watched. Thanks for the opportunity to launch this training course. I apologise for not being with you in person, but the International Day of People with Disabilities is probably my busiest day of the year. No tertiary provider in this country would exclude women with children from employment or study on their campus. In fact, during the past few years, breastfeeding rooms, creches and childcare centres have been introduced to campuses as reasonable adjustments for working or studying mothers. This is, of course, very appropriate. Working or studying mothers make up about 15 to 20% of the population. However, tertiary institutions regularly exclude people with disabilities from their learning environments by designing those environments for the average learner, not applying universal design principles. People with disabilities, many of whom are not average learners, make up around 15 to 20% of the population. That's why ADSET and the NDCO program have developed the Universal Design for Learning in Tertiary Education e-learning training. The training will give tertiary educators and support staff the knowledge and capability to design courses according to an evidence-based Universal Design for Learning framework. This approach recognises the diverse prior experiences, abilities, preferences and needs of learners. Rather than designing a course for the average learner and then making individualised adjustments for learners with additional needs, UDL accommodates a wide range of needs and preferences at the outset. This reduces the requirement for reasonable adjustments and enhances the experience of all learners, including those with disability. It's similar to making a building or piece of software accessible from the start, rather than having to create solutions to deal with inaccessible situations. Why would we need such training? Well, firstly, because making learning available to everyone with or without disabilities right from the start is just the right thing to do. We don't make a practice in most other areas of Australian tertiary education of limiting the access of a particular group of people. Second, because to not do so breaches Australia's obligations under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and is probably also in breach of the Tertiary Institutions Disability Discrimination Action Plan. And third, not to do so is in breach of federal and state disability discrimination legislation. I'm very pleased to launch this UDL e-learning training because ADSET's and NDCO's work will assist tertiary institutions throughout Australia to universally design learning. The training course is available at www.disabilityawareness.com.au. Equal and dignified access is an excellent path towards inclusion in Australian society for people with disabilities. Thanks for the chance to speak with you today, and have a great International Day of People with Disabilities.
The blue bird of Twitter brings in a sign saying follow me underneath another sign, twitter.com/Graham Innes. Subscribe.
Thank you, Jess, for introducing Graham's video, and also for your heartfelt thanks to all of the wonderful people involved in this project. I know we have seen and heard the link for where you can access the training, so much so that we've crashed the site, although it's good to see some people getting in. I am just going to hand over finally for the last word to Darlene McLennan.
Thank you, Alicia. Just a quick thank to Jess, because she didn't include herself, but I also just want to acknowledge the people that have helped us bring today together, which is Alicia Ford, Jessica Byrne, David Swain, Jane Hawkswood, Charlie Robertson and Jen Cousins, and also to our Auslan interpreters and Bradley Reporting for the captioning, and to Sharon Bailey for the acknowledgement of country. This isn't, as I said at the beginning, this is just the start. We are wanting to set up some community practices, and we're wanting to continue the conversation on a UDL page, which will be on ADSET. And we're also looking at having some forums in 2022. One of the team will put a link into the area from the Disability Awareness website where you can sign up to receive our newsletter, to join our community of practice, and to keep the conversation going. We really, as I think Frederic had said, and also many people on Twitter, it is often difficult to start and to wonder where you go. And I think for us to have a capacity to share our practice, share our teaching, share how we make some changes along the way, I think is going to help us embed UDL. And hopefully if we invite Frederic back in the next year or two, that slide will look very different that he shared from the Mentimeter. So I know that many people have to leave us. It's been great that you've been able to continue to join us on this launch. We would have been like to have had it in Parliament House or something, but in some ways it's quite even more universally set up in that we can all be accessing it right across this nation and across the world today, as many people have acknowledged that they're coming from us from many different places. So finally, I just want to thank Frederic. I know Alicia has already thanked you, but it was fantastic to hear you present so wonderfully on the journey that you've had and the experiences of so many others. And also to everybody who actually put stuff in the chat and added to the questions and also on Twitter, which has been absolutely amazing. And we will be touching or reaching out to many of the people who have actually shared their practice already with us through those mediums so that we can actually continue to upskill, you know, embed some of the things that are happening around this country into our website. And just finally, we will be sending out a survey straight after this webinar. We'd encourage you to all fill that survey in so we can continue to improve what we do. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. And once again, happy International Day of People with Disability. It was great to be able to celebrate in this way with the tertiary sector and with all of you. Take care.
It's been a pleasure.